Did Britain fly helicopters in World War II? When we think of British aviation in the war, we picture Spitfires dueling in the skies, or Lancaster bombers rumbling over Europe. But what about helicopters? The answer is more complex and fascinating than you might think. While Britain was an aviation powerhouse, it didn't deploy any helicopters in combat during the war. The technology was simply too new, too experimental, but that doesn't mean nothing was happening. The war years were a crucial period of innovation, laying the groundwork for Britain's future success in rotary-wing flight. So, let's dive into the story of Britain's wartime vertical flight experiments. We need to distinguish between three main categories: autogyros, experimental prototypes, and a handful of imported American helicopters. At the start of the war in 1939, no country had a mature combat-ready helicopter force. These early machines were plagued by weak engines, intense vibrations, and terrible reliability. Britain quite rightly focused its resources on proven aircraft that were essential for survival. Helicopters were a secondary research project, a bet on the future. The only one to see any service with British forces during the war was the American-designed Sikorsky R-4, which the British called the Hoverfly. It entered service in 1944, right at the tail end of the conflict. The RAF and the Royal Navy didn't use it in combat. Instead, they used the small number of Hoverflies they received for trials and evaluation. They tested its potential for air-sea rescue, casualty evacuation from difficult terrain, and liaison duties. Its impact was more symbolic than operational, but it was a powerful symbol. For the first time, British military planners saw firsthand that reliable vertical flight was possible and had game-changing military potential. This experience heavily influenced post-war doctrine. But Britain wasn't just relying on imports. The country was home to some of the most creative and frankly bizarre rotary-wing experiments of the war. Let's start with Raoul Hafner's incredible designs. First, there was the Hafner parachute. This was essentially a single-seat unpowered helicopter designed to be a sort of rotary-wing parachute. The idea was to tow it behind an aircraft and release it, allowing a soldier to gently descend into enemy territory. It had no engine, relying entirely on rotation. Unfortunately, tests showed it was dangerously unstable and completely impractical for combat. The project was shelved, but it provided crucial data on rotor aerodynamics. If you thought the rotorchute was wild, Hafner's next invention was the rotor buggy. This was literally a standard army jeep fitted with a large rotor, a tail, and flight controls. The concept was to create an air-portable vehicle for airborne forces. It would be towed behind a large bomber, like a Halifax, and then glide down to the battlefield. Amazingly, it actually flew, but it was incredibly complex to deploy vulnerable while being towed, and was ultimately made obsolete by large transport gliders that could carry jeeps internally. Like the rotorchute, it never saw service, but it shows the sheer audacity of British wartime engineering. Beyond these eccentric designs, there were more conventional helicopter projects underway. The WWII was Britain's first truly indigenous helicopter project that showed real promise. It was a twin-rotor design that made its first successful flight right around 1945. Unfortunately, it was just too late to contribute to the war effort, but the research and development that went into it formed the basis for later, more successful post-war designs like the W-11 Air Horse. So why did Britain, world leader in aviation, seem to lag behind in helicopter deployment during the war? Several factors were at play. Early engines just didn't have the power-to-weight ratio needed for reliable vertical lift. Second, Britain faced an existential threat and had to prioritize the production of fighters and bombers. There was simply no spare industrial capacity for unproven technology. And finally, the mechanical components, the gearboxes, the rotor hubs were still not reliable enough for the harsh realities of combat. Practical helicopters only really matured in the final year of the war, long after Britain's production plans were set in stone. But the legacy of these wartime efforts was profound. While Britain didn't field a combat helicopter force in World War II, the conflict was the crucible where its future rotary industry was forged. The experience gained from the Avro rotor autogyros, the data from Hafner's wild experiments, and the practical lessons learned from the American Hoverfly all fed directly into Britain's post-war helicopter programs. This foundation allowed Britain to quickly become a world leader in helicopter design in the late 1940s and 1950s. Companies like Bristol and Westland produced iconic aircraft like the Sycamore and the Dragonfly, which served around the world. So, in conclusion, the story of British helicopters in World War II isn't one of combat, but of quiet innovation. From the practical autogyros to the imported trainers and the wonderfully ambitious experiments, Britain cautiously but creatively explored the future of flight. These wartime efforts ensured that when the helicopter age truly dawned after 1945, Britain was ready to take to the skies. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this deep dive into aviation history, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more.